Okay, welcome back. This is going to be our last lesson. So we looked at drawing basic objects with shapes in the last one, and before that, we looked over how you draw each of the three-dimensional shapes that make up just about everything. So there's really one more thing that we can do with those basic shapes, and that's to manipulate those shapes, to combine those shapes to create even more complex things. So that's what we're going to basically do today, and draw a few things using a kind of mishmash of different shapes. So as always, draw along in your notebook and pause if you need to. Take as much time, redraw things if they don't come out quite right. That's all okay. And let's start to draw some more complex objects with uh, basic shapes that we're kind of combining together. All right, so the first object that I found that I thought was kind of interesting is a vase or a vase, but I've never heard anyone call it a vase. Most people just call it a vase, right? The classic way to draw that is just to take kind of both sides and say, well, it kind of goes like this and it kind of goes like this. And that's definitely a way to draw it. But I want to actually break this one down in terms of the shapes that are here because it's a little bit more complex. You're like, well, which shapes are in here? I can't I can't quite see them. Maybe there's a sphere or something like that. Um, it's a little bit difficult to see. So let's try to break it down together and try to see if we can figure this one out. Okay, so the first thing that I'm seeing, this is a pretty good indicator that we have either a cylinder or it could be an upside down cone. And in fact, it does look like an upside down cone because it kind of tapers down this way. So we're going to start by drawing that top piece, so that oval, and there's going to be a cone, right? That looks something like that. So that somewhat represents the top part, but not really because it doesn't go to a point. It kind of jumps back out. So in fact, it's almost like it's cut. So there's two ways to think about it. Either you can cut the cone, or you can even think about a tapered cylinder. So they're actually somewhat similar. But I think it's better to kind of cut up that cone. That's easier. And then we see in the middle that we have, what appears to be kind of another shape like that, but it looks kind of like a sphere. So we can draw a sphere just right underneath it, something like that. It might take you a while to get the right shape, but it's kind of something like this. And that kind of gets us to about right here. And then we have the same effect going on here that we did up here, which is this kind of tapering cylinder or a cone that's cut off. So we'll like add another cone to this sphere like such, and we're going to cut that one off as well. So think of like a pair of scissors, snip, 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 and we're just going to cut that up. And so we have something that looks like this. Like, oh man, that's kind of a mess. Well, one of the things that I like to do when I'm doodling or when I'm drawing is to start with a pencil. And then from there, I actually go over it sometimes with a pen to kind of clean that up. So here's essentially what I would do. I would just follow the outline. Said, oh, it goes kind of like this. I'm just thinking about the outline. And I know that there's kind of those shapes inside, but I'm following the outline because right now that's kind of the most important part. And I'm going to draw this top part, and I'm actually going to draw that lip as well. And then we start to see that that looks a lot more like this. And it also just helps us identify what the dimension of this piece is by using those 3D shapes. And of course, this would help us turn it if we wanted to. So for instance, if there was some sort of, decoration on the front of it, and we wanted to turn it, we would know how to do that because we did, basically we know that the shape is going to go around. So if the center vertical line is here, but it turned to be over here, then the heart would just fall right on that, right? And we could turn that very easily. So having a sense of what the 3D shape is going to be an incredibly useful tool. All right, so that's how we did the vase. I hope that was helpful. Let's now draw. I love this. It's a family of snowmen. This is kind of an easy one. A snow people. It's a snow family. It's a snow family. This one should be pretty easy. It kind of utilizes the same principles of drawing people. This one's kind of just one shape, right? We have a sphere. We have another sphere. We have another sphere, right? The thing I like about this one is, and we'll talk about this in another drawing video, but um, just having the sphere also indicates this kind of really important thing that happens that I think is worth noting. Maybe for dueling, it's not as important. The spheres are sitting on top of each other. And it doesn't look like this. Check this out. It doesn't look like this. That's that looks different from how this looks. Why? Because the spheres are sitting on top of each other. All right, well, what does that mean? Well, if we dig in here and we just kind of outline this, we see that, okay, here's one, and then here's two. So an important thing that's happening is that there's a bit of overlap, that this sphere is sitting on top of this sphere. And the reason is because the angle we're looking at it, the center line is about right there. And that's the reason why it looks like they're stacked up. And that gives it a more realistic take. So when we reproduce that, this looks a lot better than this. You don't even need to add the arms. You can kind of tell that this one right here is a snow person, right? When you do add them, then it becomes really obvious. But it communicates a lot by knowing that these are 3D objects that are kind of coming together. You're combining them to create a more complex object. Right. That was kind of an easy one. Let's do one a little bit harder. Okay. Oh boy, this is a box truck. There's a lot of shapes in here. Let's see what we can find. So this might at first sound kind of intimidating or daunting, but it's the same principle. We can break this down into basic shapes. And this will, of course, help us just think about how everything is made up, of course, of these basic shapes. So the first thing you want to do when you have a really complex image like this is to think about what are the most prominent shapes in here and kind of start from that. So if you imagine you're like building something, um, you'll maybe start with the piece that everything connects to. So like if you're making a person, you'll start with maybe the body and then the legs attached to the body and the arms and then the head. And the body becomes kind of like the hub. Everything connects to it. And in this case, you can kind of see that the main thing of the box truck is, well, the box. It's the cube in the back. It's the big giant storage compartment of the truck. And so we can start with that by saying, okay, what's the shape of it? Well, we already know how to draw one of these. We went over that in the cube. Now it's a rectangular cube, but it's still a cube, right? So we drew that square, right? And you drew that square behind it to give it this kind of longer, to make a cube longer. This is how we did it. We connected these lines. But if you wanted to make it longer, you would just put the second square further away and then check out what happens. You do the same exact thing. Almost looks like a loaf of bread. You can kind of shape that and make it look like a loaf of bread. But anyway, that's how you make it long. So we're doing the same thing with the box truck, all right? So we'll just connect those lines. This one would be invisible, but just to show you that it is there, you have something that looks like that. And then if you delete the lines that would be invisible, it would be the inside ones because over here is always going to be in front of what's over here. That's why you see this and not this back square. If you turn the truck and you were looking at it from the back, then you would see this and not this. But right now we're seeing this as the front. So that's just about perspective, like what is closer to the eye. The front, then that's what's going to be seen, and the things that kind of fall behind it will be invisible. All right. So that's our kind of base box shape. And I'll draw it over here freehand too. Let me draw it a little bigger, just so you can kind of see how I'm doing it, because you won't have a truck to work from. So it's something like this, right? Okay, and we'll delete some of these inside lines. Yeah, something like that. Okay. And then to add to this, I'm going to start to delete things, but fret not, they are still there, and we can see that they're still here over here. We're going to look at the kind of shape that directly attaches to that, and that's this one right here, which is actually another cube of sorts, but it's like in a different angle. So it's actually something like this. You connect that and that and that. That's kind of what it looks like. Now here's a trick to drawing things, like especially if you're working with cubes that are meeting each other, that the angles of the lines kind of, well, they don't kind of, they absolutely have to meet. So if I did this and the angle is kind of sharp like that and I put it on top of this, it wouldn't make a lot of sense. I'll show you. Like if it was over here, it wouldn't make a lot of sense, right? Like, wait, that looks really weird. And that's because those angles have to meet up. If you have no idea what I'm talking about, we'll take a look over here. So I'm going to draw this shape meeting this shape, which means that this, let me change my color here, that this angle right here of this line, so this line right here, needs to match this line. Okay? So meaning now we have something that looks like this. Okay? And it kind of goes like this. You kind of can't see the top because of the angle that we're standing in, but it looks something like that. And we're kind of extending that shape of sorts. It probably goes down a little lower. Something like that. The whole thing is probably a little bit lower. Let's do that. Okay. All right. So from there, once we have that kind of shape down, again, that's that rectangle that's hanging out here, we see that there's this shape here that goes like this. And it's actually kind of a pyramid type shape. And how this works is it's like this. Right? So remember how we drew the pyramid? How do we draw that? Like this. It's actually related to that, but it's a kind of combination of this with an actual another cube. A couple ways you can think about that. So you could think of it just as a long cube that's cut. So think of the scissors, okay? Okay, and if it's cut over here, then it's going to be cut over here. All right? And so then what happens is you have this as the base shape. So two triangles, and they connect like this and up here. Okay? And that's what's going on that top part. So again, let's try to draw it inside here. I'm going to draw it in another color because it's starting to get a little messy. But here's our base triangle shapes. And then we're connecting them like that. All right? And again, we're just using these kind of base shapes that we already had. And then over here, we have kind of another one. It tapers down a little bit, but it is for the most part just another kind of rectangular cube. We can actually attach another cube here, like this. So that goes here, that goes back here. And then we'll add this piece right here. So it's getting a little bit complex, but we're still using basic shapes. It's just a matter of observation and saying, how do they connect? Where do they connect? That's all we're doing. Okay. So we'll add another bit here, just like this. We're adding that cube again, another cube that goes like that. So here's the front part of it. Here's the back part of that cube, right? And we know that this kind of gets erased, all that's inside, right? And now we have something that, well, I'm a little bit off in my angles here, but we can just shorten that a little bit so that that meets here and that meets something around here. And now it's like, oh, okay, okay, it's starting to look like a truck. We're starting to get there, okay? We're missing some details, but we're getting there. Something like that, right? Okay. And now let's look at the wheels. Wheels are kind of difficult to draw, but what shape are you seeing here? Well, you can see that it's actually a cylinder. They're short cylinders, right? And how we draw a cylinder again is we draw an oval behind it, roughly the same size, and then we connect those two pieces. And that's exactly what these wheels are. They're just two cylinders connected. That's what the wheel looks like, right? We draw one over here. Okay, there's one over here too. And you get into perspective, and that's something that takes a little bit to learn. But as long as you have the basic idea of what's happening, I just want to show you where the shapes exist in normal objects. All right. You have all this stuff down here. It's somewhat important, but if you don't draw that, if you just draw the wheels, watch what happens. You'll see that it kind of holds up without it. You know what I mean? It's like, oh yeah, you kind of don't need this under part. It's important for what this particular truck is, but it doesn't really help communicate that it is a truck. What helps communicate it is the big box shape, this kind of window shape over here, and these wheels, which become really important, right? So you could just do something like that. Traditionally, a car has these what's called wheel wells, where um, basically allows the wheels to sit inside of them, so they're not kind of floating on the outside like a toy. And you can draw that or you cannot draw that. It's up to you. But it starts to look like that. Now you're saying, okay, yeah, we drew a truck. It's not the best truck, but you could tell that it's a truck. And we did so by using those really, really basic shapes. You can use this principle on just about anything. The one thing where it starts to get a little bit more difficult is when you're trying to draw organic shapes, different types of trees or plants. The ways that they grow is not so conducive to this type of structure, and that you kind of have to freehand. Let me give you an example. For instance, if I wanted to draw a plant like a house plant, I could very easily draw the pot that it's sitting in, right? We did that before. So again, it's like it could be like a cone, right? But I'm gonna cut the cone over here, so it looks something like that. I'll even put the water dish underneath it. They always have those little water dishes, which is just another, well, that's more like a cylinder kind of cut. But then if I wanted to draw the plant coming out, because it's an organic thing, I would just go like, it's something like this. And that might be just enough. You're like, well, that kind of looks like a plant. If you added some green in there, you definitely know it was a plant. But this, organic things tend to be a little bit harder to draw using basic shapes. Man-made things, human-made things, yeah, we definitely are using shapes to make those. So again, really simple way to draw a flower pot. If you drew a very typical flower, I guess it kind of communicate a lot more. But that's essentially maybe the limitations of shapes is organic things can be a little bit harder. But okay, that's basically how you break down objects into shapes. And one of the things that you might start to do when you practice this a lot is now when you look at things, you'll start saying, "Oh yeah, I can kind of see what shapes are inside." All the time when I'm looking at things or I'm going out for a walk and I see a weird building and I'm like, "Oh, that's a bunch of shapes combined." Or when I'm at the store and I'm looking at kitchen appliances, I still look at the basic shapes just because it's kind of an interesting and fun kind of mental activity to do. And also, the more that you do that, the more easily you'll be able to, on the fly, just kind of come up with um, different things. Like I'll be able to draw many things just because I've already thought about what are the shapes that make those things up. So, have a bit of practice, have a bit of fun with it, think about different things, and try to draw them using a bunch of shapes.